there's a famous painting of Napoleon Bonaparte hanging in the Palace of Versailles in France. If you saw it, you might even recognize it. It's not the one of Napoleon looking heroic on a rearing horse, or the one where his hand is tucked weirdly in his jacket. This painting is of a young Napoleon, thin and sharp-chinned Napoleon in a pressed military uniform. It depicts him with a wispy platinum hair and a saber, and he's waving a French flag with smoke in the background. Other similar paintings depict him crossing a bridge with his flag, or standing triumphantly on the bridge as Austrian soldiers flee before him. These are national symbols of victory and pride, of French bravery and dominance. And most of these paintings are baloney. Baloney as in nonsense, made up, complete bull, aggrandized. Napoleon was at the battle you see in the paintings, the Battle of Arcole in 1796, but he never touched the flag, never even came close, according to historian Philip Dyer, author of Citizen Emperor, a biography of Napoleon. Quote, Napoleon is betrayed on a bridge with the flag, but he didn't get within 60 meters of it. In fact, at one stage, he was pushed, or rather blown, into a ditch. Face down the water, he had to be saved by his grenadiers. If it weren't for them, he may well have drowned. You see, the Battle of Arcole was part of a larger siege, the Siege of Mantua, and the Siege of Mantua was part of a larger campaign to kick Austria and England out of northern Italy. It was during that campaign, in March of 1796, when Napoleon was first promoted to commander and given command of a whole French army in Italy. A sick, weak, crumbling army with a brand new commander. And then the Battle of Arcole happened. Against ridiculous odds, Napoleon managed to hold his own at a little bridge for 3 days. Then he sent 2 Austrian generals fleeing with their tails between their legs. But here's the important part. Right after the battle, the newly promoted commander, Napoleon, rushed back to Milan, and he commissioned a painting from a famous artist, Baron Antoine John Gros. It's a painting that puts Napoleon himself in the center of the action, holding the flag that was dropped at the bridge in Arcole. Because, as much as Napoleon was France's greatest military genius, he might, secretly, have been history's greatest manipulator. The military genius we can admire, but the manipulator, that's someone we could learn from. You're listening to The Re-Engineered You. This is a podcast about self-empowerment and all the myths, lies, and misconceptions we tell ourselves. Then we use science and history to bust those myths and re-engineer a better you. I'm your host, Todd Laments, the extrovert.
And I'm the writer, researcher, and introvert, Joe Anthony, whose job it is to dig through the outer layer of no-duh on the internet and get to the facts.
Every one of us knows a manipulator. It's a salesman who makes us feel like he's doing us a favor, giving you the friends and family discount for an overpriced laptop. It's a coworker who uses their kids as an excuse to duck out late every day. And it's a politician who paints himself as a hero of the people so he can pass bills that favor his interests. Simply put, manipulation is using fear, guilt, or a sense of obligation to get something without directly asking for it. Today, we want to know how to spot a manipulator and where they learn their best tactics from. So we're starting with a few myths about manipulators. Myths like: Myth 1, good manipulators are subtle. So how do we spot a manipulator? And how do we know when they're manipulating us? Myth 2, how do some people get so good at manipulation? It's not like there's a well-known, best-selling book that allows them to hone their manipulation skills. Is there? Myth 3, is it ever okay to manipulate other people? Is gossip inherently manipulative? Is lying? But before we get into our myths, I want to talk to Joe about the bigger picture of why young Napoleon would want to manipulate the public into loving him.
So, Todd, listening to your intro, having Napoleon blown into the water and then get up and then have his men sort of win the battle for him and then go off and make a painting depicting on how heroic he was,
Shame on him.
Shame on him, yeah.
Well, I wanted you to think of Napoleon as a modern-day politician as much as he was a military leader. So he was a shameless self-promoter.
Kind of like a podcaster.
See, he was seen as a fixer, a savior for a nation recovering from the revolution.
Okay. So he really almost did have a heroic origin story.
He really did. And Napoleon was very skillful at shaping his image, hoping that he would be set forever in history, that he would be this god worshipped for years to come.
Okay. So he kind of had this image picked out for himself before he started.
He was a man of vision. And to be honest, it survives to this day. The casual observer sees him as what? A military genius from France, right?
Right. Yeah, before we started this research, I actually didn't think we would ever uncover, like, when I was looking for manipulators, I did not think Napoleon.
One thing about him that I read from the research was how intelligent he was. He was just borderline genius, and he was, just a world-class military guy.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know how happy the French would be about this biography if Dyer did.
Okay.
Because it's pretty negative.
He's tearing down sort of a genius hero of theirs, right?
Yeah, the biographies are usually like that. Either they never did anything wrong, or they never did anything right.
Right.
They're not ever usually both sides of the fence. But what Dyer did say in his book was, he was full of it. Basically, there was always something driving him to constantly make war.
Okay. How bad was it? Like I've only heard of like Waterloo, Egypt, and maybe Arcole.
Well, the battles went on for 20 years.
Okay, that's a lot.
1 million French troops lost their lives.
Okay. Well, that's more than I expected.
Well, not to mention civilian casualties. And they all died from different ways. They think it's estimated there was around 4 million civilians that died. And they weren't all killed by, friendly fire or war. A lot of them died from starvation and disease.
Okay. Well, that's I hear, numbers of thousands when I listen to like history and read about Napoleon's battles, but that kind of puts it into a bigger perspective, like the constant war.
Well, and if you're going to total it all up, during Napoleon's reign, there was possibly, most likely, 6 million lives lost.
Okay. So we're looking at manipulation on sort of a much larger scale then.
I got to tell you something, too. Him as a manipulator. See, nowadays with our modern day politicians that we have in this country, they have expert specialists, these people that come in on their team and teach them how to spin everything, these spin doctors. It is said, well, he didn't have that. He didn't have staff to do that. This was all his Napoleon's doing.
So he was both a military genius and his own lobbyist, basically. He was his own team.
And he was good at it. And he could keep it going for that long.
That's awesome. I mean, also horrifying, but awesome. So we'll probably get into, hopefully, how he did that as we go. But would you like to discuss how to spot manipulation?
Yeah, so I can not get taken advantage of anymore?
Right. Both on a personal level and also how we can do that with politicians. I won't... It's currently 2021, just for reference if anyone's listening to this in the future. And we have just gotten over an era of politics, still working on an era of politics that is very much manipulative. It doesn't matter which side of the political aisle you're on, you're used to manipulation at this point. So we're going to go through Time Magazine and their take on manipulation. This is written by Time and therapist Sherry Steins. And it basically breaks down how manipulation works and what side of it people land on. Basically, who is doing the manipulating. So, to start, we'll define manipulation. And Todd, tell me if this sounds right to you. Manipulation is an emotionally unhealthy psychological strategy used by people who are incapable of asking what they want in a direct way.
Sounds about right. They don't come out and direct. They just make it seem like you have to help them out. Or
Right. I think before reading that, I had always thought of manipulation as people just trying to get what they want. But after reading this article, I realized that asking for it, that's what kind of separates a manipulator. Because I will ask for something. If I don't want to manipulate you, say, I will ask you, can you work on an episode while I'm away on vacation?
I promise when you come back, it'll still be where it was before.
Whereas if I were being a manipulator, I would say, oh, this episode will never get done while I'm away. And then I would just sort of guilt you into doing it.
Yeah, or if I tell you I'm dyslexic and make up all these excuses, so you say, okay, I'll do it.
Right, exactly. So you don't feel like you can ask for something because it's too big, so you get someone to do it. Steins goes on to say, when you are being manipulated by somebody, you are being psychologically coerced into doing something you probably really don't want to do. She says you might feel scared to do it, or obligated to do it, or guilty about not doing it. So, do you want to get into the two types of manipulators?
Yes.
We don't want to make it sound like everything falls into neat little categories, but this one sure seems pretty clear to me. Once time broke this down, it made it easier for me to conceptualize. So the two common manipulators are the bully and the victim. And this also really kind of came across with relationships too for me. After I read this, I was like, oh, I've seen this in relationships between people romantically and in like the workplace. So Todd, the bully, apparently makes you feel fearful, and they use aggression and threats to control you. Have you encountered the bully before?
I have, and one of my bullies was a 5-foot-tall ex-wife of mine.
Okay. And what kind of threats would they use, if you don't mind me asking?
Oh, no. To take away stuff from me, to embarrass me in public.
Okay. Yeah, we usually assume that aggression and bullying is something that, like, they're threatening you physically, but that's a threat too. Yeah. Embarrassment or social, making you feel like you're going to be ostracized if you don't do something. That is a bully move. I've had bully bosses that hold my paycheck over me, where they won't say do it or I will revoke something from you or you'll get paid less. It's do it or I might not give you as many hours next week.
Right, but they don't come out and say it. You just have that feeling, right?
Exactly. Yeah, they will do it by saying somebody else is getting less hours. You know, we might shift things over to them. Like they do it much more slyly than a direct intimidation.
I think when we think of bully, what do we think of? We think of that mean kid on the playground.
Yeah.
But bullies are really, there's romantic bullies, there's work bullies, there's certainly family bullies.
Right.
And I like the one you brought up because we spend a majority of our lives at work.
Right.
So what a terrible place to be vulnerable because it's your boss's pay, or a coworker that's doing it because you can't say anything or you're not being politically correct.
Right. You're literally stuck there 5 days a week probably. And yeah, somebody's got some power over you.
Living the American dream.
Yeah, that's right. So we're going to get into the second type of bully, the victim. So the victim usually acts hurt. Manipulators, when they play the victim, the reality is they are actually causing the problem, but they make you feel bad for the problem existing in the first place. The one that I can think of right off the top of my head, I've seen this a couple of times vicariously, where somebody will be in a bad relationship. They have helped make the relationship toxic and unstable, and then they will come to you and tell you that they need out and they need someone to save them, that they have been victimized and they need to be put into a new living situation. And they will, ride on your couch for a while, or they'll have you move them. And in reality, this is a pattern. They've done this 19 times in the past 20 years. Yeah,
they're trying to escape an abusive relationship, and then you feel like, they're making it seem like you're going to be together.
You always want to
untold promises,
right,
not spoken promises, right?
Right. You always want to take signs of abuse seriously, but if it's just somebody who is financially tied themselves in a relationship and they do this every year, or if they have a pattern of this, that's something that I've seen a victim manipulator express, like that they will say, oh, I need help. And that doesn't have to come with relationships either. I've seen people do this where it's just they planned poorly financially, and now they need you to bail them out.
For me, Joe, I've had this in my life, and probably the number one bullies I've had have been friendships. And I have kind of what I think of as a weakness. If you do something for me, I'll let you do anything to me.
Okay.
And so I've had friends who have, let's say, loaned me money or known me for a long time. So I feel obligated, and they know that. So they'll put a guilt trip on me if I don't spend enough time with them. And I don't enjoy it, but instead of being man enough at just saying I don't want to spend time with you because you don't hurt their feelings, and it's a social tax.
Right.
But they're totally manipulating me. They sense it, and they've done it to everybody. It's not just me.
That's something that one way we're talking about identifying manipulators. That is a good way to do it too, is to see how they treat other people and see how they manipulate other people who aren't you. Talk to their friends and talk to other family members who deal with them. That's a good way to sort of spot that repeating behavior. So we have the bully and the victim. The bully tries to be aggressive and makes you use threats and intimidation to control you. The victim will act hurt, and they will make you feel obligated to help them even if they put themselves into a circumstance. So let's put this into sort of real-world context. Up at the opening, we talked about the salesperson. And what you said, a manipulator gives you something and then later on expects something larger from you back. They do a social scorekeeping. So a salesperson might say, because they gave you a deal, you should buy the product. Like, they offered you a deep discount, why aren't you buying this new phone? If this is in a relationship, a partner might buy you flowers and then later request something in return. Or a dirtbag dude might buy you dinner and then ask for sexual favors in return. According to this article, they say these tactics work because they abuse social norms. It's normal for us to reciprocate favors, but even when someone does one insincerely, we still kind of feel compelled to reciprocate.
Yeah, but like you said, our instincts are to be fair.
Yeah.
You know, if you open a door for me, I want to open a door for you.
Yeah, exactly. This is not from this Time article, but have you ever heard about the studies with babies and how much of a sense of justice they start out with?
No. Babies.
Okay. I will have to find this so we can link it into our show notes. But I remember reading about a study where like they would show babies, like literally babies, shapes that were on a hillside. And one shape would push another shape, like a red triangle would push a blue circle down the hill. And then they'd show them the same clip again, and they'd show them the blue circle getting revenge. They would push the red triangle down the hill, and the babies would laugh. They had a sense of justice. So
babies are big shover, pusher, biters, too. If you bite me on the arm, I'm going to bite you on the face.
Babies want revenge. No, babies, we're not saying that. We're saying we have an innate sense of fairness in the human race, or at least that's sort of my takeaway.
Babies are haters. That's my takeaway.
That's fairness for us is being haters from the start. But this article, the Time article, goes on to say that manipulators trying one of these two tactics, they will usually use a foot in the door technique, in which somebody starts a small and reasonable request, like, do you have the time? Like, I've had this where I'll be out walking in Portland, and somebody will ask if I have the time. And then after asking, hey, what time is it? Then they'll ask for money.
Oh, that's their hook.
Right.
To get eye contact and get you to stop, get you to slow down. That's harder to say no because you're kind of...
Yeah, because you've already given them one small thing. Why not the next thing? And they say in this article this is commonly used in street scams. And then the opposite is the door-in-the-face technique, which means somebody makes a big request and you naturally reject it, and then they make a smaller, more reasonable one. This is something I've had family members do, where they'll be like, can I borrow $100? And you're like, no, get lost. And they're like, how about 10?
They hit you high and negotiate down.
Exactly. I think in business they call it anchoring, where you ask for something huge, and then once that shock has set in, then they ask for something they actually want.
Hey, Joe, if you can't take advantage of friends and family, who can you take advantage of?
Right. I'm going to use anchoring on my own family, by the way.
I always say that, too, when people say strangers. Strangers hurt. You got to keep kids away from strangers, stranger danger. And I always say, it's not strangers that hurt your kids. It's parents, teachers, friends. It's close people, uncles, aunts, you know?
Right. And being able to identify manipulators means earlier on being able to identify that in people close to you. And it's not something you need to beat them up for. If you see somebody manipulating you, you don't have to separate yourself or disconnect them from your life. Just recognize when they're doing it. Recognize when they're being the victim or the bully, or when they are sort of anchoring you, when they're asking you for something huge and then lowering that bar. Just realize, oh, this is a manipulator's tactic.
This is an opportunity to set some healthy boundaries, though.
Exactly. Perfectly put. So we profess to be basically an apolitical podcast.
We try not to tip our hand.
Yeah.
But mostly because we're not political people, too.
Right. I've mentioned on this podcast that I'm a political independent. But one can't help but feel manipulated after this presidential race. Like, I feel like I have had 10 times the amount of manipulation and promises filled to me, like funneled at me from the TV than any other political race.
And certainly social media.
Right.
You get it from your own friends and family, too. Probably the most.
They echo it. Like it comes from the TV, and then they are the echo chamber that hits.
They get that, what do you call it, political outrage, and they take, did you see what they did? Look at this.
Exactly. So are you telling me with Napoleon that isn't a new thing? That's not something that was invented this political cycle?
Again, without spin doctors, this guy must have stayed up late at night working on this stuff. But he had a great understanding of press in general. He exploited army reports, fine arts, literature, education, and religion just for his benefit. He used propaganda and censorship to establish himself into a world power.
So Napoleon, I mean, we talked about him being his own political lobbyist. He was his own team.
Yeah, and he just flooded everything. He went, again, education, arts, military reports. He just put himself in every single thing, so he was very, very visible.
Okay.
Definitely ahead of his time. I mean, 1796.
Right.
The first one I think of course, is Hitler, being the big propaganda guy. But this has been going on for a while.
Yeah, when we started this research, Hitler was the first thing we went to. And turns out he wasn't, I mean, like, he used a megaphone, but it turns out Napoleon had more bases covered earlier.
Absolutely, more media outlets. Okay, now when he started his regime, there was like 70 different newspapers in Paris and all around, different provinces.
Okay.
He started shutting them down, Joe, to all but 4.
All but 4?
Yes, and then he owned those and controlled those. And then he created about 6 new newspapers between 1797 and 1798. So he opened these, and of course, they were all pro-Napoleon.
That's almost Russian propaganda-esque with like a national newspaper. That's crazy.
Write this with I'm doing a gun to my head right now.
Yeah.
You can't see that on the radio. Now, a lot of the propaganda was military propaganda. So there wasn't TV and there wasn't radio back then. So what they do is they read these articles about Napoleon winning these great battles and defeating and outsmarting all these generals. None of them was true. It was all fiction. But he won the military over. So many, many soldiers felt like to honor him, he would do it for them. So they're going to fight to the death for him.
Oh, I hadn't thought about that. That he would publish these newspapers, and sure, the local bumpkins and the civilians would read it, but it makes perfect sense to me that, like, soldiers who are in his army would read it too. and they would just be reading about basically heroics they want to be part of.
Now, he also targeted intellectuals, and he was very in tune with the social powers. So he went out and got like 200 mathematicians, astrologists, engineers, architects, painters, all the great thinkers of his time. And they saw him as a celebrity. They saw him as enlightened. So he appealed to the poor, and he appealed to the super smart and rich.
Wow. Okay.
Now, he'd have pamphlets and propaganda made up real cheaply and handed out the streets for all the poor people. I mean, I guess back then you call them peasants.
Okay. So his face would be basically everywhere.
All his writings were in the first person, even if the stories weren't about him. So you start to get brainwashed, and you start to think that Napoleon, France's leader, is the greatest leader of all time.
I think I might have actually heard those exact same words, greatest leader of all time, used in North Korean propaganda.
Oh, and nobody likes that cat. Now, Napoleon would have expensive paintings made of him, usually of his war battles where he's, waving the flag and making Austrian generals run away. And he'd put them in the finest galleries in France. So, of course, common people weren't able, they can't afford to get in a place like that. So he'd make hundreds of thousands of cheap copies and kind of like poster ones. So everybody in France could have a poster of him, their hero, on their wall at home. You can't make this stuff up, man.
That's admirable. Like I like the idea of a leader having his own bootlegs that he is selling on the corner. I almost imagine himself having a bootleg booth where he is peddling basically
he puts like
posters.
A little disguise on and he's handing stuff out.
Right. Buy cheap.
This is what I took away from this. This guy was a publishing tycoon. He was a master marketing. And if today he was around, he would be running CBS, ABC, and NBC.
Right.
His was total and complete censorship.
So censorship, and it sounds like a bit of almost like con manning. We kind of want to get into a little bit of the manipulation that goes into a con. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, con man is confidence man. And you remember that movie Catch Me If You Can with Leonardo DiCaprio?
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is the real life. His name is Frank Abagnale. Now, this is real funny. This guy was a big con artist, but he isn't this slick, smooth talker that you would think. Don't you think of a con man as being gregarious and good looking and with this smile that just goes ding?
Right. I think of when we talked about the salesman manipulator, that I always think of that as the con man, that they're shiny smile and that they're almost slick like a salesman.
Yeah, they're at this party and everyone's drawn to them. They have perfectly polished shoes and they just look the part, right?
Right.
They look like a stage actress. Well, this guy was very vanilla. Even the way he talked, his voice was really boring. He was just very simple. And I'm thinking, how did this guy? And I'm just going to tell you about some of his cons because it's just really interesting to me.
Okay.
He started by taking advantage as a manipulator of his father, so family manipulators. And he started with little stuff like shoplifting and writing bad checks. This one was he got a little bit older. He got a little bit more seasoned. And this one cracked me up. So what he would do is he'd go to the bank, Joe, and he'd take all of the deposit slips and write in his account number. So people who came in and weren't paying attention, they grabbed that thing thinking it was their account number because they're thinking about other things, and they would deposit money directly into his account.
Whoa. Okay, so let me back up a little bit. So he would fill out that section first, let them write on the paper he had just written on, and they'd be accidentally putting money into his account?
Right. They just put $700 in, and they think, oh, I already filled that out.
Whoa,
it's just so simple and clever.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. That's the simplest con I've ever heard.
So I just said 700, right? $700 put in. He had got 2.5 million in total come in.
So that worked a lot.
It did. And then he moved on. He forged a Pan Am, the old airline, a pilot's license. He just, made one up with whatever you make them up with.
Okay.
Now, he never flied any airplanes. But in the old days, when pilots would go to different cities, they would get cash for their per diem. This is a long time ago. So he would fly from country to country, 26 countries in all, riding on these planes, eating at the best restaurants, and staying in these first-class hotels the way pilots used to travel.
Wow. Okay.
He was a pediatrician for a year, but he quit because he almost killed a newborn.
Oh. So at least he had the sort of moral understanding to bail.
Well, the guy was smart, okay? So he passed himself off of going to Harvard Law School, but he never did. He said he was a graduate there, but he was smart enough to pass the bar exam.
Okay.
That's pretty smart, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's impressive that you could pass the bar but not actually do the schooling for it.
Just memorization.
Right.
Now, finally, all his warrants caught up with him. You can ask me how many?
How many warrants did he have?
Well, these aren't just warrants. 12 countries wanted him. So we're not talking about a few speeding tickets in Louisiana here, people.
So he's kind of wanted.
12 countries wanted him expedited, Joe.
Okay. So is that what got him caught? Just everybody was reaching out for him at the same time?
Well, U.S. held him. They weren't going to give him to anybody else because he was from there, and he had done a lot of dirt here. So he was in prison for quite a long time, and then the feds cut him a deal. They were going to release him from prison, which I think he manipulated them to make this deal, because this was never done before. But he had one condition.
I'm dying to know. What is his condition?
I'm trying to build up the tension here with Joe. I'm using his narrative writing skills
my head's
against him.
gonna explode.
He had to go work for the FBI.
Oh, okay.
So he used his 10,000 hours of experience, all these years of scamming, of experience to capture other crooks, because he was the best in the business.
Okay, well, that makes sense. I mean, why not use the talent that's there? If you're the FBI, that makes sense to me.
Now, I was watching one of his interviews, and this really resonated with me. I really like this. This is on topic. He said there's a tip. Okay, there's a tip he's going to give you. Now, Frank said these two things go into every single manipulation scam. Two things. He says there's no exceptions. It doesn't matter if it's a $5 million scam or a $50 scam. These are the two things, and this is a takeaway I want everyone to hear. The first one, the need for money urgency right now. There is no tomorrow. It's a now or never deal.
Okay.
And if they want any of your personal information.
Okay. Well, we covered in the first section, spotting manipulators, that one of the key components is a manipulator has urgency. Whatever they want from you, they want it quickly. So this resonates with me, at least.
The greatest con artist in the world says the same thing.
That's awesome. Say we wanted to not just learn from Frank, Abagnale, and Napoleon. What if we actually want to become manipulators? Do you want to just sort of explore the dark side with me for a minute?
Let's do it. Let's see if we can pull it off. I think I'd be better at it than you. I'm a little morally bankrupt compared to Joe here. Freaking Boy Scout.
As a manipulator, I think you would be more hands-on talking to people on the phone. I would just quietly try to use, like, crooked checks or something.
You'd be on the internet doing your damage.
Manipulate vicariously. Yeah, a good thing is I don't think Todd and I can morally get away with that. We have people who are watching over our shoulders. But if we wanted to, if we want to get into manipulation, at least we want to know how manipulators, like really, really powerful manipulators, how do they get to where they are? I looked into an Inc. article by Justin Barizzo, and he wrote for The Atlantic. So this actually sort of has credible roots. This is called The Dark Side of Emotional Intelligence. Now, Todd and I, we've talked on this podcast about emotional intelligence before. When we talk about it as a positive. How would you categorize emotional intelligence?
Being mature and being able to put things in its place and slowing down, not getting emotional or angry too soon.
Okay. I think that's a really good way to summarize it.
How would you summarize it?
Being able to use emotions correctly to guide decision making, being able to recognize the emotions you're currently feeling and to put them into perspective. That's something we covered in granularity. And there are books about this. The most famous one I can think of is EQ, which is emotional intelligence. And I've never run into a business that hasn't handed that out for free to all of its employees. Like, it's such a ubiquitous book at this point.
Some of the people I look up to who I think are very emotionally intelligent, they put the right amount of weight like a scale. They know how important this is. They know how unimportant this is. And it gives them real balance in their personal life and at work.
That's a great word for it. Balance, yeah. Emotional balance, emotional context, knowing how heavy or how important what you're feeling actually is. Well, I found through this article that emotional intelligence is hugely important for manipulation on a large scale. So, like, Napoleonic manipulation means understanding the emotional weight that you are conveying to somebody. You have to be very self-aware to be able to say, okay, the public will really like this picture of me waving a flag in front of a bridge we just captured. So in this article, they mention that one of the most influential leaders in the 20th century spent years studying the emotional effects of his body language, that he watched his own hand gestures, analyzed his own images and his movements to become an absolutely spellbinding public speaker. And from historian Roger Morehouse, he said, it was something this man worked very hard on, and his name was Adolf Hitler. So we mentioned Hitler earlier on, and that he was...
So we saw him at the podium waving his hands, and the way he was, his posture and everything, that was all premeditated.
Every part of it. He worked very, very hard on the emotional manipulation part of it. It's something that he knew is that at the start of his speeches, if you ever watch a Hitler speech back to front, like from the start, he doesn't start by screaming and yelling and waving his hands. That doesn't happen till the last part. He starts with pretty calm, pretty normal sort of assessments of Germany and their current plight and their economy. And then he builds up to, here are the villains doing it to us. And he's suddenly screaming and waving at the crowd, and they're in it.
Getting all the emotion and working them up.
Right. So, if you don't mind, I would actually like to go through political manipulation, basically how to use emotional intelligence and how it's used against us, like point by point, and the strategy we can use to diffuse it, to recognize it and rob it of its power.
Sounds interesting.
Yeah, because we don't want to be the bumpkins that get Napoleon's image on a poster and think this is my hero.
Yeah, or lambs led to the slaughter.
Exactly. We don't want to
just following everybody else.
Right. We don't want to be the follower in this because we'll get taken for a ride. So the first one we're going to talk about is what Hitler did, which is they play on fear. A manipulator will exaggerate facts and overemphasize things to scare you. They'll tell you that someone's coming for you or that someone is taking something from you. They will play on our loss aversion. And the strategy to diffuse that, my dumb, immediate gut reaction strategy is, let's fight them. Let's stop this thing from happening.
You're already believing it already.
I am, yeah. Just reading that, I think somebody's coming for me. But the simple way to diffuse that, the strategy, is just be aware of statements that imply that you lack courage or that somebody's attempting to put fear into you. If you watch the news, you know exactly how this feels. You have somebody tell you that something is coming your way, or you're not going to be you're going to be powerless. So if somebody tries to make you feel powerless, even if it's just showing you scary images on the TV of things being burned or people marching, just think about how small that actually is. That they really had to send a cameraman in and capture just the right shot to get that image.
It's not happening to 350 million Americans.
Right. Yeah. They're posing that so that you can feel fear. The second way manipulators operate, they deceive. Now that sounds really simple to say. Of course a manipulator deceives, no duh. But to think about it in a different way, that everyone that's probably listening to this values transparency and honesty. But a good manipulator, if we say wanted to become good manipulators, we would get better at spreading misinformation without it being a direct lie. For example, managers or employees who purposely spread unconfirmed rumors and gossip to gain advantage. I've seen this in my own workplace, and I have not participated in it, but I've dabbled in it at work, where I will say, oh, somebody makes more money than the rest of us, even though they hold the same position. But I won't explain why or how that happened, or that they just interviewed better than me. I will just simply put it out there for everyone else to stew in.
And everyone gets pissed off. Do you think some of the deceive is just of who they really are? Do they deceive at their own representation?
Maybe. You mean like, is that something they naturally do?
No, not naturally, but they say, oh, they make themselves look more than they really are.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think that when somebody deceives like that, the implication is, don't we all deserve more? Don't I deserve more? And the strategy to go against this is simply, don't believe everything you hear, or rather base your decisions on reputable sources. If we all get sort of taken in, especially we'll go back to the news here real quick. We like to believe that we're smart and we're clever and it's hard to fool us. And so once we trust a news source, we will continue trusting them. We will say, this is a qualified source. I can't be fooled by them because I've already vetted them. You should always sort of have that in the back of your mind, that somebody could be deceiving you, even if you've trusted them and been rewarded for that before.
What was that episode we did about how our natural instincts are guard us against beautiful people because we feel like they're going to take advantage of us. We won't be able to say no to them. We'll hand them our wallet in one hand, our heart in another one.
Right, yeah. Yeah, we had an episode about attraction, and it was, we have a natural, some people will react on guard when somebody beautiful approaches us, and it's because we have a little hit of cortisol that makes us cautious. We should all have that with news sources and manipulators as well. So yeah, just keep that in mind. That's a good strategy to employ, is make sure over and over the source you're listening to is actually trustworthy. Another one manipulators use emotionally is they take advantage of us when we're happy. We're not going to cover this one too much because this is something I think everyone has encountered and is aware of. But when you've been placed in a situation where you're going to be happy naturally, you're at a fine diner and you've eaten a really good meal, and they want to offer you the expensive dessert or the high quality wine, the super expensive menu item. We do the same thing with our friends and family too. We know to hit them up for money when they're in a good mood.
That's so true, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
I've done the same. So the strategy against that is to just work to increase your awareness when you're feeling a good range of emotions, not just negative. We talked about this too. Manipulators take advantage of reciprocity. We've kind of covered that already, so we're not going to dwell there. But a manipulator who is skilled, emotionally skilled, they just know when they've given you something small to ask for something big in return. Manipulators ask a lot of questions, people who are skilled emotionally. And instead of going to the strategy for this, I'm going to ask Todd a quick question. Have you ever had somebody who, especially at work, who just inundates you with questions?
Well, that's a sales thing right there. And what you do, we call it investigating. Because what you want to find out is who you're dealing with and what their hot buttons are.
Okay.
So you know what to talk to them about and what not to talk to them about. Because in sales, when you talk about things that are people's hot button that they care about, you get closer to the sale. When you talk about shit they don't give a shit about, you get further. I know it sounds very simple, but it takes some. And when I meet people, I try to ask tons of questions. It's because of my personality as a salesperson, because I want to connect with them. Okay. And that's a bit of manipulation too. Oh, I know about that college. I had a friend who went. It doesn't matter what it is. I'll find something. Oh, I drove through there once, and did you see this or whatever it is? That's
also in How to Win Friends and Influence People. That's a Dale Carnegie book.
That is true. I forgot about that.
Yeah. So be aware when somebody is asking lots of questions. They're oftentimes seeking information. Not necessarily as a bad thing. They may actually be trying to connect with you, but
They might be trying to sleep with you too.
that too, yeah. Yeah, the shady guy at the bar that won't stop asking questions. Emotional manipulators who are skilled will speak quickly. Because of shows like Sherlock and House, we actually expect intelligent people to speak fast. So manipulators will oftentimes use jargon and technical speech. So you can be aware of it when somebody is going over your head intentionally. The instinct is to think of them as, oh, this is a professional. They know things I don't. When in reality, if they're a professional, they would know how to speak on your level.
Yeah, they wouldn't say anything at all most of the time.
Right. Sometimes good manipulators emotionally will display negative emotions. We usually assume that a good manipulator will make us feel good, but oftentimes it's a skilled manipulator who will raise their voice or use strong body language to show they're upset. Coaches, basketball and baseball coaches, are masters at this. So like I had a boss I worked landscaping and construction briefly, and he would use this because all of his employees were young guys, and it was easy to sort of make them jump and do what he wanted when he would sort of raise his voice and take on the stern lecturing tone.
No, the coach thing resonates with me being a big sports fan, because you see these grown men throw and the women too, the women coaches, they throw absolute embarrassing toddler-like temper tantrums, Joe.
Right.
And you just think, why do they do that? But that's exactly what, because they're trying to get a call overturned, or they're trying to get the next call. They're planting seeds to get something good to happen for their team.
Right. They're showing that you can't walk on them, and they're showing that they are emotionally aggressive, and so they will get a call overturned for later on.
Emotionally aggressive. I like that.
Yeah.
We'll use that.
We covered this one too. Good emotional manipulators, people who are emotionally aware, they will give you extremely limited time to act. And we already talked about that one, so we won't dwell. But the last one we want to cover from this article, they give you the silent treatment. They will deliberately stop responding to text messages or calls or emails, or they will simply sort of play the silent treatment in real time. They will pretend like they didn't hear what you just said.
I do want to go back to the other one about limited time, Joe, because that,
okay.
To me, another one about that is they won't let you talk to anybody. If it's an elderly person, they don't want you to talk to your kids. If it's a spouse, they won't let you talk to them. You have to make a decision right now. When really, if there's nothing wrong with what they're doing, they should want you to talk to everybody and take as long as you need.
That is a really good point. I've read about sort of scams that people run on the elderly, and they're absolutely predicated on the person not reaching out and getting somebody else's advice.
Yeah, you don't want to bother them with that.
Right,
it's going to make you look dumb, and you're going to waste their time.
When in reality, if it's a good deal, all your friends will tell you, hey, this sounds great. So there's a dark side to manipulation. We covered this in the intro a little bit. People who are manipulative, they're sometimes lacking something in their esteem. We just want to state over and over again that the reason why manipulators exist, the reason why anyone manipulates anyone else, is because they don't feel confident enough to outright ask for something. They have to manipulate you because what they're asking for is too big. So I'm going to ask Todd here, because he's done the study. What is the cost of manipulation? What does that take out on your self-esteem? Did Napoleon ever have, like, doubt moments?
Oh, he had severe depression. Now, remember our depression episode we did about Abe Lincoln?
Right, the Vulnerable Leaders episode?
The fact that he was suicidal many times in his life?
Right.
Very similar to Napoleon.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I've learned a lot about Napoleon. He moved to France when he was 9.
Okay.
Doesn't that surprise you? Don't you think of him as a Frenchman his whole life?
Yeah, he's the French icon.
Now, he moved from Corsica. He always spoke his Corsican dialect, which is more like Italian than it is French. And he was very insecure, Joe, a lot of his life, his younger life, because of his accent.
Okay.
And probably teased a bit, right, in those days?
Oh, totally. Yeah. I think almost everybody with an accent in a foreign nation gets teased.
Yeah. As a young soldier, he wrote a lot that he always felt alone, even when he was surrounded by other people. Deep depression, his thoughts dwelled on death. So he thought about his own death all the time.
Even young.
Oh, very young. And at as young as 15. He used to say, I see no place for myself in this world. He just didn't feel like he belonged.
I'm getting some strong Lincoln vibes now that you've mentioned it.
Yeah, it sounds very, very, very... he would spend all of his time off away from other people. He would go run and hide and be alone and just dig himself into a deeper depression. He started talking about suicide at a very young age of 16.
Okay. So, this wasn't him manipulating people. We haven't even come to that yet, and he is already sort of having, self-esteem problems.
Big time. And he was lost in life right now. I think it's important to know that his dad died when he was 15. So he was the man of the house, and it put a lot of stress on him.
Wow. Okay.
He had think about taking his own life when his mother wrote to him and said that she needed money. He was flat broke and couldn't send her any, and this was just crushing for him.
Wow.
So his first number one suicide attempt was very early in his career. He was in his 20s. He didn't have a job, and he just felt like a loser. He just felt like a total unfortunate.
Okay. Well, at least we know where he gets his motivation from
being so low. Now, his second suicide attempt, this one's kind of interesting. He had hit rock bottom. He was on the run. He was in retreat from Moscow in a battle, and he was feared that he might get captured. So he had poison around his neck. So instead of getting tortured and killed, he was going to drink this poison and save them the trouble of killing him.
Wow.
But he kind of jumped the gun a little bit, Joe.
Okay.
He never got captured, but in a moment of weakness, he drank the poison.
Oh, wow. I mean, I really get the idea of having poison on you for, inevitable capture and torture, but if you have a button around your neck that just ended it all at any moment, I mean, at some point you might think about hitting that button, especially if you're
depressed
Napoleon
all the time, and
right.
And you're in battles all the time. Well, this is the funny thing about it to me. It's not funny trying to commit suicide, no matter who you are. But the poison was like 2 years old. 2 years old, so it wasn't as potent as it is. Kind of like snake stuff, venom.
Okay.
It's less potent than the older snakes. So it didn't kill him. He just got really, really dog sick.
Oh, so you wished it had worked. Wow.
This may have been just a way to manipulate everybody too, right?
Hey, everyone, I've taken poison. Feel bad for me. No, that sounds awful. That would be terrible. Oh, man. Okay, well, we're going to lighten things up just a little bit if you don't mind. So manipulation, being a manipulator, means you have to have slightly low self-esteem, or at least you have to have low enough esteem to where you don't feel like you can ask for stuff. So we want to know when is it okay to be slightly manipulative, and what is manipulative? Because we covered already that manipulative is lying, and it involves gossiping. So
this is the part I was excited about. I want to hear about this gossiping thing. Everybody gossips, and everyone says they hate gossips.
Exactly. Yeah. I wanted to know, am I being manipulative when I gossip about people at work? Am I being manipulative? Can I lie without being manipulative? So we want to sort of relieve the moral burden on anyone listening to this episode and thinking, oh my God, am I manipulating people? So this comes from a Time article, Why Do People Gossip? And they looked through a 2019 meta-analysis. So it was a bunch of studies put together. And this came from originally the Journal of Social Psychology and Personality. And the research found that 52 minutes a day on average between 467 subjects went into gossiping. So in that 52 minutes a day on average for a person to be gossiping, only about 3/4 of that was neutral. meaning that 3 out of 4 times that somebody would gossip, it actually wasn't negative. Like, it wasn't trying to roast somebody. It wasn't being manipulative. It wasn't trying to get something out of each other.
See, I think it would be the opposite. It'd be like 75% would be negative.
Me too. I thought it was going to be like housewives being like, Carol's a bitch.
Yeah, exactly. And then she's not around.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, destroying somebody's reputation without them.
Don't you always think that, though, when you're gossiping with one of your friends, and you just kind of think, I wonder how they talk about me when I'm not around?
Right. I always assume it's going to be very exciting or negative or something. Yeah, but according to this research, the scientist Robbins, quote, said, it was kind of boring. Not salacious at all, not
it
negative.
It wasn't sexy, it wasn't,
Right. Around 15% was deemed notably negative. And though gossip amounted to a smaller portion still, only 9% seemed to be, quote, negative gossip. So the slice we're talking about where it's like Desperate Housewives negative, where it's like really tearing somebody down, only about 9%.
That's not bad at all.
No. And I think to me, this mostly means gossip is actually like just getting to know each other and establishing social boundaries. Now, there's another researcher we've mentioned on this podcast before, Robin Dunbar, and she came up with the Dunbar's number, the idea of how many people we can hold in our head at one time, unrelated to this. But Dunbar pioneered an idea that gossip actually might be social grooming. So
explain that to me.
Okay. Well, we've talked about like how chimps will like pick nits off each other. They'll like sit there on a branch and they'll like pick through each other's hair to like get fleas and dirt off, and it makes them feel socially connected.
And big cats groom each other.
Yeah, big cats lick each other and get dirt off. It basically means that like you spend a couple minutes a day working on each other's welfare, basically. Like, you make each other feel better, and it makes you feel bonded and connected as a group. Dunbar said that gossip might be this. Gossip might be our version, because we are one of the only mammals on Earth that can communicate with language. We might be using our mouths and our words to pick nits that we might be calibrating.
I get that. You and me as friends, we'll kind of empty the well to each other, and that's the way to get it going. Is well, what's going on with this? What's going on with, your romantic interest? What's going on with your roommates? What's going on?
Exactly. We all do the same sort of thing. According to Robin Dunbar says, quote, where gossip comes in because chit-chat is mostly talking about other people and conveying social information. So precisely what you just said. It's calibration. Gossip, Dunbar argues, gives humans the ability to spread valuable information over very large social networks that we normally wouldn't have access to, just because we can spread things gossip group to gossip group. Quote, gossip in this broad sense plays a number of different roles in the maintenance of healthy social functioning groups through time. So if you look at it as sort of the broader spectrum, if I tell you about my social group and what we're up to, and I tell you my group all hates the current political leader. Say my group says we all love Napoleon. All my friends love Napoleon. We're putting up Napoleon flags. You might compare it to your social group and say, what about us? Who are we into? And you might go back and say, hey, all of my friends that on this side like Napoleon. Why don't you guys have posters of him hanging in your room?
Do you think it gives you some status with your friends too? That you're in the know about different people and different things?
I absolutely believe that. We're going to have an upcoming episode about team building and social groups. And they say in the research that social groups look like chemical bonds, that you have clusters and then connectors and then bigger clusters after that. And if you are a connector, gossiping means you spread information group to group like a chemical chain. One thing I will say, though, that when gossip is negative, when they identified that 9% that was just nasty, so we're going to identify what is manipulative gossip. It's when the researcher from the top of this article, they say, quote, it's when you're not learning anything and no one is benefiting.
So when they're talking about someone being promiscuous or someone being overweight where someone, just bad things happening to them.
Yes. You hit on one that is very pernicious and very evident, which is when someone's ugly. If you're gossiping about how somebody looks, it's not something they can change. It's not something anybody benefits from. It's nothing that actually helps anyone or anything.
That's bullying and just being plain.
Right.
A bad person.
It's just trying to ostracize somebody.
Don't you ever do that where you get a thought in your mind and you think you're just disgusted with yourself that you even thought it?
That's, I'd say that's 20 times a day with me.
No, you get those, you know what I mean? And you're thinking, there's no way I would say that out loud. What a dickhead for even thinking that.
I do. And I think people who are bad gossips, people who are manipulative gossips, they just say them.
3-year-old, just right out of their mouth.
Right, yeah. They never grow out of the children say the darndest things. They're just like, no, I'm going to keep that.
I'm going to say it again. Guilt and shame is needed for some of us.
That actually seems to be a bit why gossip exists, is as social calibration, it also teaches us what we shouldn't be saying. If everybody around the water cooler is gossiping and one person says, hey, Pam has really fat thighs, everyone turns to that person and sort of gives them the evil eye. That means that was over the line. That was bad gossip.
And we all have that. We all know at least one in our lifetime, that 1%, less than 1% person. And you always hear this saying. You don't hear it very often because there's so few of them. I've never heard Joe say a bad word about anybody.
I save that for my gossip group. Thank you very much. No,
so they're gossiping at church or wherever else they go, right?
I have a sewing circle, and it's old style gossip. No, I would say the same thing about you and a lot of my friends. Is most of the gossip we share is positive. It is social grooming. So how about lies? How many lies do you tell a week?
Oh, boy.
That's telling.
More than the average. I'm bringing the average up, whatever it is. I haven't counted lately, but yeah.
Okay. We're going to go with a American Psychology article, and they talk about how it's about 11. The average person tells 11 lies per week. I almost feel like that's a little bit low.
Yeah, I think so too. I think everybody lies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's something they mentioned in this too, that almost pretty much everyone lies. The average is 11 a week, so I know some people are bringing that average up. I'm looking at you. I'm kidding. Totally kidding.
People say I hate liars. You always see the romantic things. I hate liars.
Yeah.
And the people that say that, I think, lie the most.
Right. Lying also is not inherently negative. According to this, most people lie to sort of keep things at a social norm. So lying usually is not for benefit. It's not me saying, hey, I need your checkbook. I'm going to write some stuff in it. It's unrelated to anything I need, or lying to get money, lying to get benefits.
I think some of mine is protecting what I think my image is. I don't want to look bad.
Precisely. Yeah. Everything I could find about lying, a lot of it was social calibration, protecting image, protecting ego, that kind of stuff.
And I know people don't care. I know I'm not the center of the universe, but I just don't want them to know that about me.
Yeah. We covered a little bit of that in our ego episode, that people who are super egotistical, borderline sociopath, almost all their lies are protecting their image. Also in this article, according to a psychology study from University of Notre Dame, honesty can cause better health. So lying may keep you more comfortable. But according to this article, quote, we found that participants could purposefully and dramatically reduce their everyday lies, and that in turn was associated with significantly improved health.
I get that, because when you don't lie and not trying to protect your image, you're just at peace. And there's the people who say they don't care what other people think. But there's some people who really don't. They're really kind of centered and confident. Right.
I feel like anecdotally that's true. I meet people who don't lie much, and they just seem more confident than me. Like they don't. It's not that they don't care enough to lie. It's that they don't care enough about their own image to taint it with lies, to skew it.
What do you lie about? Got to get back to you here.
Same thing. I lie for image. Like if I lie on rare occasion, it's because I'm trying to protect my ego, and usually I'll feel bad after. I'll be like, why did I say that? That was ridiculous.
Joe's one of those jerks too. Probably the only one I've ever met that has never said a bad thing about anybody. I try to kind of trick them and manipulate them into talking bad about somebody. I'll give them like a soft, well, did you notice that Debbie, in one of our circles with, our status in our Toastmaster circles? He's never once gone for the bait. But I'm not going to give up. You got to keep trying.
Eventually you'll hit somebody I don't like. We're not going to go into this study that went into how lying makes you healthier. Basically, it was just a loose association. I'll just read this quote here by Kelly and her associates. They said, quote, "Statistical analysis shows that this improvement in relationships significantly accounted for the improvement of health, which was associated with lying less." Basically, lying less, for the people that did lie less in their studies, they had overall better health. It's not correlation. It could be, it doesn't necessarily mean causation. It could be correlation. More study needs to go into it. But basically, people didn't feel the need to lie as much. They generally led healthier lives. So to summarize, gossip isn't inherently negative. Lying is not inherently negative. Most of it is social calibration and social grooming. But if you decide to lie big, you'll be slightly less healthy, but you might end up taking over the world like Napoleon. So if you're going to gossip negatively, do it big.
Throw him under the bus.
Exactly. So speaking of doing it big and throwing leaders under the bus, we've talked a lot of shit about Napoleon in this episode and how much of a manipulator he was. Do you think, or does history think, he was overall bad for Europe and France?
Well, Joe, there's different sides of that story.
Okay.
And I don't want to end this episode by pushing that Napoleon was a negative influence on history or on France. He was a major manipulator. And yes, he sank France and Europe into constant states of war. We talked about the loss of life being 6 million people.
Right.
The Smithsonian writer Andrew Roberts points out, France and Europe might have been better off if Napoleon was never defeated at Waterloo and eventually banished. So they're thinking if he kept going, things would be better.
So like we're going into an alt history timeline. We're following Napoleon as if like he had just kept going.
And he did a lot of great things, too. Even though he manipulated the public to get more approval, to get more popular, to get more famous, he also built lots of public works buildings. Elephant Fountain at the Bastille, a marketplace in St. Germain, the Louvre, and the Foreign Ministry. He hired famous and talented people to be educators. So he made the public works a lot better.
Okay.
Now, remember when this time was in history, Joe, in the 1790s. This is the one thing that I think was great. New government officials, he hired with their merits as serving as politicians, not by who their father was.
Okay, so he's pulling us out of basically feudalism and appointing people by blood, and he's actually choosing them for their merits.
Yeah, for how hard they'll work.
Okay.
To keep it short, Napoleon pretty much crushed blood, who you were, over merits of just hard work.
Okay.
If he would continue to be the emperor of France, all his people hiring people on their merits would have spread throughout the world. Art, science, and education would have spread way farther and faster if he would have stayed and would have been captured and killed. Napoleon could have turned Paris into the Enlightenment center that he always envisioned it. And I think a lot of this was based on because he came from nothing.
Oh, okay. That's a good way to look at it. And of course, coming from nothing, implementing this as a grand vision, maybe that kind of excuses a little bit of the manipulation.
Yeah, and he sees all these rich kids getting promoted to generals, and then he had to do the hard work.
Okay, so you'll forgive me when I start my grand propaganda campaign?
Make sure it's manipulating people to listen to the re-engineered Jew.
There we go. That's it.
Whether the manipulator in your life is a small fry or the reigning emperor, it all works the same way. Manipulators want to get something out of you by using guilt, fear, or social obligation without directly asking for it. If you knew how much money your sibling really planned to borrow, or how many years your new commander wanted to wage war on your neighbors, you'd tell them to buzz off and drink poison. Gossip and lies are not, on their own, manipulative. In fact, most gossip isn't even negative. It's more of a social calibration tool. Gossip is how social species grooms each other. And while lying less may keep us healthy, not all lies are intended to manipulate. Finally, emotional intelligence isn't the sole domain of those seeking self-actualization. Sometimes the skills of emotional intelligence are hijacked by master manipulators, leaders who would use false empathy and social awareness against us. Emotional intelligence can be a manipulator's ultimate lever to maneuver us into feeling fear, outrage, or panic. They may pressure us into acting quickly and not asking too many questions. Like Napoleon, a manipulative leader will tell you that asking questions is unpatriotic. So we're here to assure you, you don't have to fall for that manipulation. You've been listening to The Re-Engineered You. Thank you so much for listening to the show. You mean the world to us. We have a new episode every week.
You can connect with us at www.reengineeredyou.com, where we have research links, show notes, and blog articles for each of our episodes. We also appreciate feedback, and we love spirited debates.
We're not experts in anything, but we've got an opinion on everything.